proceed?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning. We are here because of Bryan Pata, the kid who was living out his childhood dream in 2006. He was a University of Miami football player, an NFL prospect, a larger-than-life college athlete. He was a son, he was a brother, he was a friend. We are not here because of his life, we are here because of his murder. On the evening of November 7th, 2006, Bryan Pata had just returned to his apartment from football practice. He parked his car in the parking lot, locked it, and began to walk towards his apartment. After only walking a few feet, the defendant approaches him and shoots him in the head. Bryan's body lay lifeless on the ground. He was discovered by his girlfriend and his roommate, who called 911. Police arrived. What ensued at that point is an investigation into one of the most popular football players at one of the most popular teams in the city of Miami. Because of the media impact of this murder, detectives are given a multitude of leads that they have to investigate, track down, and vet. But, members of the jury, you will hear that regardless of where this investigation took detectives, it kept coming back to one person, Rashaun Jones. Let's go back to earlier in the day on November 7th. By midday, Tony Hernandez, who was the compliance officer at University of Miami at the time, will tell you that he notified Rashaun Jones about his suspension from the football team. This was his second suspension for a failed drug test. Rashaun receives a letter that confirms his suspension, that copies the coaches on that. One more suspension, and he's facing the loss of his scholarship, playing time, which he wasn't getting too much by that point anyways. His dreams, essentially, of playing major college football begin to dwindle. And in the midst of all this, Bryan's star is on the rise. He has the girl, he's got the talent, and he's got the popularity. Jones begins to unravel. By 3 p.m., he doesn't go to practice. Instead, he changes his cell phone number. Calls his girlfriend at the time, Sherry Abramson. She's paying for his phone and has her help him change his number, which you will see on his phone records. By 4 o'clock, he's got a new number, and the only people that have it are very few. One of them is his friend, Bruce Johnson, and the other is Sherry Abramson. 6 p.m. happens. The defendant knows that practice is over. He gets a call from Bruce, who would have been at practice. That's on the phone records. Dwayne Hendricks, who's the roommate of Bryan, will tell you, by the time practice ended, he and Bryan left roughly around the same time. Bryan takes some freshmen home on the way to his apartment. Dwayne stops for gas. Fed know who you were here from. It's Bryan's brother. On November 7th, right around the time that he was murdered, they're on the phone talking about life, talking about cars. I'll tell you they're catching up. He knew that Bryan got home that night, but he never heard his voice again. 6:35 p.m. Paul Connor, a professor at the University of Miami, who lived at the same apartment complex as Bryan, that day happens to take the metro to UM. He picks up the metro at Dayland Station, takes all the way to UM, takes it back after class. He will testify that he remembers checking his watch, and it was 6:35 p.m., and it took him about 20 minutes to walk the mile to his apartment. As he approaches the apartment complex, he hears what he describes as a bang or a pop. He immediately looks up thereafter and sees the defendant exiting the apartment complex on foot. He gets a good look at his face. He even turns back and sees the defendant hurrying away, still on foot. As he walks through the apartment complex, he sees Bryan's car, which you will see in a photo is parked sort of right in the front, with its taillights on. But he doesn't see Bryan, who's lying lifeless on the ground behind the bushes. He continues to walk onto his apartment, which is on the other side of the complex. Around 7:06, 911 call goes out. Police arrive on scene. Bryan's body is there. Still has his wallet on him with cash. His luxury SUV is still in the parking lot. The keys are with Bryan. This is personal. An area canvass begins. Detectives begin working. Word immediately begins to spread. Media floods the crime scene. Family members flood the crime scene. Teammates, some coaches. By 7:10, 7:30, right, it starts to spread a little bit more through the players and the coaches. They start to get notified. An all-team mandatory meeting is called. Coach Navarro, who's a member of the coaching staff today at UM and who was a member of the coaching staff back then, will tell you that the coaches found out about Bryan's murder during a coaches meeting. When that somebody walks into the meeting and lets them know, when that happens, Coach Coker picks up the phone and calls Chief Hudak, City of Miami Coral Gables. Chief Hudak, who was a former UM football player himself, he's been working with the University of Miami as a security advisor as well as a mentor to the players, speaks with Coach Coker and says, we got to have a meeting right now. All the players need to get to the Heck Center right now. Bring everybody in. The goal at that point was to first check on everybody mentally and physically. Excuse me. Coach Navarro will tell you that the way that they began to notify all the players was sort of through this phone tree. The coaches would sort of call out to the players, and the players would sort of reach out to the other players. Everybody's got to get to the Heck Center. Right now, we're having a meeting. Around 7:30 p.m., Bruce Johnson, the defendant's friend, calls him. It's on the phone records. Hey, you have to come down to the Heck Center. There's a mandatory meeting. Defendant says, okay, all right. By 10:20 p.m., most of the players have already made their way down to the Heck Center where the meeting is at. Rashaun Jones still hasn't shown up. The defendant calls Mike Sanders. Mike Sanders at the time was a baseball player. He was roommates with a football player. Mike's family had money. That was a fact that was sort of known. The defendant called him and says, hey, Mike, I need money. But wouldn't tell him why. Hangs up the phone. Mike is so weirded out by that call that he books it to the Heck Center to tell Coach Coker. By the time he gets there, Rashaun Jones is still not at the meeting. Team meeting goes late into the night. By the time it ends, the only person, the only teammate who does not show up to the meeting, aside from Bryan, who's dead, is Rashaun Jones. The following day, Paul Connor, who watches the news, realizes the significance of what he saw that night and contacts the Miami-Dade Police Department. They meet with him. They eventually give him a lineup, and he identifies the defendant as the person that he saw leaving the apartment complex that night. Now, you're going to hear that Paul Connor's testimony was perpetuated previously. That just means that a witness gave testimony in a courtroom under oath with lawyers who asked questions. Because there was a concern at some point that witness might not be available in the future, even though that witness isn't here today, the law allows you, members of the jury, to hear his testimony, and you should consider it the same as you consider any other testimony that you hear throughout the trial in this case. So, the story of Bryan and Rashaun begins well before Rashaun pulls the trigger. It goes back to when he first joined the team as a freshman in 2004. Therefore, in order to understand how we got to November 7th, 2006, we have to travel back in time to fall of 2004. The backdrop, as we kind of talked about a little bit already, is the University of Miami. Between at least 2004 and 2006, it was at its peak. Players on the football team were the best of their high school. People were going to UM with dreams to make it to the NFL. The first sort of catalyst where the seed of resentment really gets planted happens in August of 2004. There was a fight in a dorm room. You will hear from Eric Moncourt and Dave Howell, who will tell you that the defendant was caught by Bryan, Dave, and Eric in Eric's dorm room. While he's caught in there, words start to get exchanged. There's sort of a verbal dispute between Bryan and Rashaun, and then that verbal dispute turns physical. He gets headbutted by Bryan, beat up essentially. Rashaun is so upset that he tells Bryan, better clip up. Dave will tell you what that means. That first fight may have ended there, but that embarrassment that Rashaun felt lingered. Dave will also tell you that he saw a small revolver-type gun in the defendant's hands later that fall. You will also hear from Kareem Brown, another player, who knew that the defendant had a .38 because he bragged about it. George Hertel, who's a Miami-Dade firearms expert, will tell you the projectile removed from Bryan's head was a .38 jacketed lead hollow point bullet. That was a fact that wasn't publicly released until after the defendant's arrest in 2021. Now, that seed of resentment starts to grow. You will hear about Jada Brody, who was Bryan's girlfriend at the time. They met in 2005. They were living together up until Bryan's murder in 2006. Players will tell you all about their relationship, how they loved each other. It was just their 1-year anniversary that they were celebrating. You will also hear that Jada and Rashaun, before she had met Bryan, had a fling. He wanted her, she wanted Bryan. Football. Bryan, by 2006, was an NFL prospect, third-round draft pick. His focus was on the NFL. He was one of those guys who was going to make it, being scouted by several organizations in the NFL by that point. Rashaun, on the other hand, was facing his second suspension. He was not really playing too much, unknown. He could not get out of his own way. You will hear in the end, Jones was never really a fan of Bryan. They weren't friends. What had started as early competition hardened over time. Jones was resentful of Bryan. That grew into envy. Jones never had his name called with the same excitement over fans, the same excitement from Jada, or the same excitement from the NFL or any of the coaches really at UM. Even though Rashaun was the one who broke the rules that led to his suspension, if he couldn't have it, Bryan couldn't have anything either. The state only has to prove two things to you: that a crime was committed and that the defendant committed that crime. As you heard in voir dire, the murder happened in 2006 and the defendant was arrested in 2021. There is no statute of limitations for murder. That is why homicides continue to be investigated over the passage of time, because the facts don't change. Therefore, the passage of time is not a defense. As you heard and you will hear throughout this trial, this is a circumstantial evidence case. All that means is that it's a case that is proven on facts based on other proven facts and the logical and reasonable conclusions that you members of the jury can draw from them. We are not asking you to speculate. This is not guesswork. The evidence in this case only requires you members of the jury to use your common sense. As you sit through this trial, we are asking that you just pay close attention to each and every witness who testifies, because each person will provide a piece of evidence that in the end points only to one person, the man sitting at that table over there, Rashaun Jones. Rashaun Jones's actions paved a path through his behaviors, his timings, his communications, his actions, and it is the context of those combined circumstances that would allow you members of the jury, at the conclusion of the state's case, to find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder. Thank you.
Thank you, State Defense. Yes, Judge, thank you. Good morning. Two things can be true at the same time. Bryan Pata's death was an absolute tragedy. But Rashaun Jones is innocent. Bryan Pata's family deserves justice. They deserve answers. They deserved answers then, and they deserve answers now. But justice is not served by convicting an innocent man. And Rashaun Jones had absolutely nothing to do with this. We are here 20 years later. This is not a rush to judgment case. This case is different. This is what a deliberate failure of justice looks like. What you will learn during this trial is the truth. We are here today because of pressure, not because of proof. And the simple truth is that Rashaun Jones is innocent. Now, the state just got up here and told you that they were going to prove this to you, that they were going to prove the allegations they made beyond all reasonable doubt, that Rashaun Jones did this. But they won't, because they can't, because it's simply not true. So instead of any evidence of murder rather, which is why we're here, the government is going to bring you ordinary, innocent facts. And they're going to ask you to do mental gymnastics to make their theory fit. Members of the jury, the law does not allow that. In every criminal courtroom, this one too, there are certain rules. Those rules protect me, those rules protect you, and those rules protect Rashaun. And there are two rules that I want you to keep front and center as we work through this case, as you see the evidence in this case. First, as Ms. Jones-Peabody wonderfully put it during jury selection, Rashaun Jones is cloaked in the presumption of innocence. The same presumption that protects us all. And that presumption stays with him through this case every single step of the way. The second rule is that the government, because they brought these accusations, they chose this case, they have the whole burden of proof. And that burden never shifts. That means that unless the state can bring you reliable, credible, solid evidence that proves these accusations, the law says you cannot convict. And if the state needs you to fill in blanks, if they need you to jump to conclusions, then they haven't met their burden of proof. And in this case, the evidence is not going to come close, because Rashaun Jones had nothing to do with this. Having said that, during this trial, the government is going to insist over and over and over again that all roads led to Rashaun Jones. They are going to be more certain than their evidence. They are going to be more certain than their witnesses. They are going to point the finger at Rashaun Jones again and again and ask you to convict him of murder. But during this trial, there's going to be nothing to support their ask. Nothing at all. All roads did not lead to Rashaun Jones. Members of the jury, remember this. Just because the government tells you that something is true does not make it so. Their job is to bring you the evidence. Your job is to look carefully at the evidence that they bring you, analyze the conflicts in the evidence, and there will be many. And notice all of the evidence that they don't bring you, the lack of evidence. And if you do your job, if you use your common sense, there can only be one verdict here. So, as the state said, their theory is that Rashaun Jones and Bryan Pata hated each other. They had beef, according to the state. The truth is that while they weren't best friends, they were teammates at the University of Miami. Like all young men, particularly athletes, the testosterone was flowing. And shortly after Rashaun started at UM, there was an altercation in Eric Monker's room. The state mentioned that. Now, the state may call it a fight, but you're going to learn that it was really much more of a beatdown. Bryan punches Rashaun, throws him on the bed, headbutts him 5 times. Another teammate has to pull Bryan off of Rashaun. Rashaun gets up, he pulls himself together, and on his way out the door, he says, "Better clip up." That's why we're here. The evidence will show that this dorm room beatdown was in 2004, 2 years before Bryan was tragically killed. And in between, Rashaun and Bryan were teammates. They practiced together, they ate together, they traveled together for games. So let's talk about what happened on November 7, 2006. Earlier that day, Rashaun Jones is asked to report to the Heck Center. He learns that he's been suspended from the team for testing positive for marijuana again. He goes home, spends some time feeling sorry for himself. He calls his girlfriend, Sherry Abramson. You'll learn that Sherry was Rashaun's safe space. They cared for each other. They were lovers, but also friends. And after he licks his wounds, he heads over to her place on Miami Beach, and he stays the night. And then, nothing. Nothing for 15 years. The police interview Rashaun, along with other teammates and other students, but they never really treat him like a suspect. They don't bring him in for a sworn statement for 15 years after he's already been arrested for this horrible crime. He didn't even know that Paul Connor picked his photo out of a photo lineup until he was arrested in 2021. And we're going to talk more about Paul Connor. They don't search his car, they don't search his home, and then a few weeks later, Rashaun is back on the team from his 2-week suspension. On November 23rd, 2006, he's a starter at the UM football game. Ask yourselves this. If anyone is actually concerned that Rashaun Jones killed another teammate, how does that make any sense? So fast forward 15 years, August 19th, 2021, Rashaun takes his lunch break. He has no idea that his life is about to come to a full stop. He steps outside to wait for his wife to come and drop off his food. But when he looks up, he doesn't see his wife. Instead, without any warning, federal and state law enforcement officers pull up, jump out of their cars, and come at him with guns drawn. Rashaun is arrested, interrogated, and extradited to Miami to stand trial for the murder of his teammate. A horrible crime that someone else committed 15 years earlier. A crime he had nothing to do with. Now you're going to hear from Detective Dominguez. Detective Dominguez was the lead homicide investigator on this case from November 2006 until August of 2020. For 14 years, Detective Dominguez did not arrest Rashaun Jones. Listen to his testimony. Ask yourselves this. If the lead detective on the case for 14 years...
Objection, Judge, argumentative.
Assisting.
Ask yourselves this. What changed? I'll tell you. In August of 2020, Detective Segovia replaces Detective Dominguez as the lead investigator. Within 1 year, and with nothing new, Rashaun Jones is arrested. Now at the time, Detective Segovia was a homicide detective, but now he's the chief of the cold case unit. You are going to hear from Detective Segovia. Please, pay close attention to him. He'll tell you himself. There was no evidentiary breakthrough. There was no new evidence at all. The only thing that changed, according to Detective Segovia, was his fresh set of eyes. Detective Segovia did nothing to investigate. You'll see that Detective Segovia was never interested in the truth. Not then, not now, not at all. You will see that certainty without verification is Detective Segovia's MO. Detective Segovia was interested in only one thing: making an arrest and making a name for himself in the process. And once he picked his target, the truth became inconvenient and irrelevant.
Objection, Judge, argumentative.
Assisting.
Move to strike.
If you please disregard the last statement, you can continue.
Without Detective Segovia, we wouldn't be here today. Which brings us to Paul Connor, the state's eyewitness, who didn't see a crime. We wouldn't be here without him either. But as the state told you, Paul Connor won't be here in person. Instead, the state is going to show you a video of his testimony. Pay attention, close attention to that video, because this case rises and falls on Paul Connor. And Paul Connor, no offense to him at all, is going to be very confused. You'll see. What he'll tell you is that he heard a sound, a pop or a bang. He crossed paths with a stranger for 1 second, maybe two. It was dark, daylight savings, so it had been dark. He wasn't wearing his glasses. He gives a description. Young, black male, 6 feet to 6'1", short hair and a neatly trimmed beard. And he gives another description. He says that the person who he saw smiled at him, looked pleasant. He says that that person had a clean set of white teeth, no golds. He's going to repeat that a few times. But here's what's important. Paul Connor did not see a murder. he didn't see anything out of the ordinary that night. He'll tell you that himself. And 7 months later, he was shown a lineup, photo lineup. That lineup was unrecorded, and the quality of the lineup, you will see, was terrible. Most importantly, what you'll notice, pay attention to that lineup, and notice how there aren't any teeth showing. And when Mr. Connor was asked how certain he was of his choice, he said he was 90% sure, and that the person had different facial hair. Members of the jury, 90% is reasonable doubt. If the state's
Objection,
own...
Judge, argumentative,
Sustained.
move to strike.
Okay, please disregard the last statement.
If the state's own eyewitness has reasonable doubt, so
Objection,
should you.
Judge, argumentative,
Sustained.
move to strike, please.
Okay, please disregard the last statement.
Last week, during jury selection, the state asked you if you could convict Rashaun Jones of murder 20 years later if a piece of the puzzle was still missing.
Objection, Judge, argumentative.
All right, let's stick to what evidence they're going to hear instead of argument. Sustained.
You're going to see that there isn't just one piece of the puzzle missing. All of the pieces are missing. And the pieces that they have, the random pieces, are not going to fit. The evidence will show that. Now, we talked about Paul Connor and the dorm room beatdown 2 years before. Here are some other random puzzle pieces that the state is going to bring you. The Hecht Center meeting that they spoke about that night. The state's going to tell you that Rashaun was the only one missing. But as you heard, Rashaun was suspended earlier that day for failing a drug test. That's not evidence of murder. The state also said that Rashaun Jones was the only one who wasn't at the meeting. That's not what the evidence is going to show, for whatever it's worth. Now, the state is also going to call 3 witnesses who are going to talk about Rashaun having a gun at some point in time. 2 of those witnesses will be some of Bryan Pata's closest friends from college, now police officers. And the other will be Rashaun's ex-girlfriend. They will tell you, again, that at some point in time, completely unrelated to this case, Rashaun had a gun. They won't remember any details. One of them will say that Rashaun talked about having a 38 caliber gun. That same witness is not going to remember what kind of gun he had in college. And even if all of this is true, keep going back to that is not evidence of murder. Another random puzzle piece that the state is going to bring you, a phone call. They told you about that, from Rashaun Jones to Mike Sanders. Phone records will show that there was a call. During that call, Rashaun asked to borrow money. The state wants you to see that as suspicious. But here's what the evidence will show. It was common knowledge that Mike Sanders' parents owned Kentucky Fried Chicken franchises. He was very wealthy. Rashaun, on the other hand, was college broke. So broke around the time that, the evidence will show this, he was calling Verizon in the days leading up to check his account balance. Remember, it was 2006. People were running out of minutes. Things were differently back then. He also called his bank. And here's something that the government is not going to emphasize. And this is important. Rashaun Jones never left town. He was back on the team by the end of the month. So I'm not sure what they're trying to insinuate with the money call, but the evidence will show that it had nothing to do with this. Now, the state's also going to tell you that Rashaun changed his phone number that day. But pay attention to the time when the phone number is activated. Hours before Bryan Pata is killed. And then he gives his number out to people that he knows. That makes no sense. You'll learn that his girlfriend, Sherry Abramson, who you'll hear from, her family owned Verizon franchises. Like I said, it was 2006, and the evidence will show that Rashaun Jones was running out of minutes. Not evidence of murder. The state is also going to call a cell site expert to suggest that Rashaun Jones was at the crime scene. The evidence is not going to support that. Rashaun Jones, you're going to learn, and Bryan Pata lived in close proximity to each other. And that is simply not how the technology works. Nothing in those records is going to place Rashaun Jones at the crime scene at any time near 7 o'clock on November 7, 2006. The government is going to try to force those puzzle pieces to fit. Because you will see there is not going to be any real evidence. Like the state said, facts don't change. Facts are stubborn things. And the pieces they bring you, they didn't fit 20 years ago and they don't fit today. During jury selection, some of you said that if the government is prosecuting Mr. Jones...
Objection, Judge. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Okay, please disregard the last statement.
We're here 20 years later. The evidence will show nothing changed. No new evidence, just Paul Connor. The state won't bring you a single piece of physical or forensic evidence. No murder weapon, no DNA, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, no real eyewitness who saw anything that matters. And Paul Connor, like I said, for whatever his testimony is going to be worth, says he's only 90% sure. Nothing ties Rashaun Jones to this in any way. The evidence will show that. You are also not going to hear a coherent motive that makes sense. And it's true, the state is not required to prove motive.
Objection, Judge. Argumentative.
All right, let's stick to what the, overrules for now, but let's stick to what the evidence is going to show.
The law does not require you to leave your common sense at the door. The evidence will show that Rashaun Jones and Jada Brody hooked up once freshman year, moved on with their lives. It was college. That's not motive for murder. He had another girlfriend at this point. With respect to their theory that he was so jealous because Bryan was this larger-than-life football player, which he absolutely was.
Objection, Judge. Argumentative.
Sustained.
The evidence will show that Rashaun Jones and Bryan Pata played different positions. They were different years. They were not in competition. None of it will be motive for murder. These are not small gaps. You are going to have so many questions. And when you do, remember, it's the state's job to bring you those answers. The government has had 20 years to do their job. 20 years to get this right.
Objection, Judge. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Move to strike.
Please disregard the last statement. This is like the fifth or sixth argumentative that I sustained. Let's move on from argumentative statements. Go ahead.
The government has the burden of proof here. They chose this case. They chose to prosecute that innocent man.
Objection, Judge. Argumentative.
Sustained.
The basis for their prosecution is a problematic photo lineup. You'll see that. And you'll learn, the evidence will show, that that existed back in 2007. Almost 2 decades ago. hold them to their burden of proof all the way through. Justice for Bryan Pata matters. But convicting the wrong man is not justice. It only deepens the tragedy. That is why at the end of this trial, when the government completely fails to meet their burden, when Rashaun is still wrapped in that presumption of innocence, his quote perfectly intact, we will ask you to return the only possible verdict, consistent with the law, consistent with the facts, and consistent with the truth. Not guilty, because Rashaun Jones is innocent.